Hi, everyone. We have really enjoyed reading through the many ways in which you engaged in design thinking this week.
Within your documentation of working with young children, design thinking showed up naturally, flexibly, and child-led. You shared examples of how this framework helped you solve an authentic problem with the children, as well as examples of how you used it as a lens in which to view and support children's capacity to problem solve.
When design thinking emerged within your interactions with adults, we saw it being used in service of solving time and resource management. Design thinking was being utilized in a more metacognitive manner as a lens through which to view the issue, which emerged through verbal communication to build empathy.
In both scenarios, it was clear that empathy was centered in the experience. With empathy as an entry point to this framework, it guided your interactions and mindset as you engaged in design thinking. Kyla shared, at the beginning of the interview, it felt very scripted and structured. As I got more comfortable, I was able to be more authentic, which led to a better interview.
Louisa was able to let go of a scripted procedure at work and make space for someone to bring their experiences and strengths to light, which led to a better iteration or outcome for both of them. She reflects, this was also more enjoyable for me because I wasn't so caught up on if they were doing it the one way they were taught, and more noticing what works for them and what doesn't to use in future trainings.
Teresa highlights some of the commonalities between design thinking and messing about. Design thinking and messing about are both human-focused and support empathy rather than being solely problem-focused. Both processes allow for creative thinking and acknowledge that people bring their own experiences to the cycle.
Taking that into account, we need to highlight the sense of dissonance that has emerged. Many of you struggled with how to see design thinking occurring naturally with young children, especially those who were pre-verbal or nonverbal in their capacity to name a problem. We touched on this a bit last cycle with the square phase of messing about, noting that children can express themselves in many different ways, not just verbally. Through careful observation, we are able to learn what they are curious about and listen to their ideas. This reminded us of the Hundred Languages poem by Laura Smallaguzzi, which grounds the way in which educators in Reggio, in which educators in Reggio interact with all children. We'll read it to you now.
100 Languages by Laura Smallaguzzi. The child is made of 100. The child has 100 languages, 100 hands, 100 thoughts, 100 ways of thinking, of playing, of speaking, 100 ways, 100 always, 100 ways of listening, of marveling, of loving, 100 joys of singing and understanding, 100 worlds to discover, 100 worlds to invent, 100 worlds to dream. The child has 100 languages and 100 and 100 and 100 more, but they steal 99.
The school and the culture separate the head from the body. They tell the child to think without hands, to do without head, to listen and not to speak, to understand without joy, to love and to marvel only at Easter and Christmas. They tell the child to discover the world already there, and of the 100 they steal 99. They tell the child that work and play, reality and fantasy, science and imagination, sky and earth, reason and dream are things that do not belong together, and thus they tell the child that the 100 is not there. The child says, no way, the 100 is there.
And we want to end it here with this thought in connection to the poem that we just read. If we are doing it right, we are in a constant state of design thinking. We hope that with time, you are able to internalize design thinking as a mindset in which to view your interactions. Sometimes it can be a way to analyze a situation, and sometimes this can manifest with a tangible outcome. And sometimes this will not be the framework that you will choose, which is why we're offering you multiple to examine. And last week, we shared an example of design thinking being used to analyze a situation. So now we're going to take a moment to show you an example of a more concrete application within a preschool classroom.
Okay, so this is a design challenge that I implemented with my preschoolers each year when we were doing a unit on nursery rhymes. So one of the classic ones, of course, Humpty Dumpty was one that they got really into. And so we would start off by reading Humpty Dumpty and examining it in all the ways that we would examine nursery rhymes in preschool, reading it over and over, talking about rhyming words, reading it together, and just all the fun things that we would do. But what made this unique is that I wanted to engage in design thinking with them and build empathy for Humpty Dumpty. So what we did is we started off by just connecting with him. Like we know his poem well, right? And what's his story? What's his problem? And they would identify, well, he keeps falling off the wall and he keeps climbing it and falling off. And of course, all children can connect to falling. And so I would ask them, when you ask them, have you ever fallen like Humpty Dumpty? You can imagine the numerous stories that were told and the number of boo-boos that were shared. And which was really fun. And so we would then talk about like, what are the kind of things that make you feel better? So Band-Aids, kisses, hugs, all those kind of things would emerge. And then also we would talk about ways that they like to stay safe. So they talked about how they have to wear helmets or that they need to hold hands when they're crossing the street or if they're walking on something that's kind of unstable, knee pads for soccer, all those kind of things. And so once they had connected to Humpty Dumpty, we would then build a little bit more empathy. I found these amazing, I love Sesame Street videos that brought the poem to life. And so these links are still here for you to watch. They're pretty funny. This is Humpty Dumpty in the classic situation here on the left. But then also, and you can see they have put a helmet on him. And then on the right, Humpty decides to go play football, right? So Humpty Dumpty clearly is a man of action and he's not letting his fragile shell stop him from engaging in physical activity. And so our question was, how might we design a way to keep Humpty Dumpty safe? Because at first they were talking about, well, he just shouldn't do that. Like he's too fragile. And we talked about how this is just really a core of who he is and he needs to go out and about. Like that's what he wants to do. And, we don't let, scrapes and bumps keep us from, playing outside, riding our bike. So we just need to figure out a way to keep him safe as well. So that led us to the ideate stage. And they asked for some examples. Rock climbing had come up. And so I shared some examples of all the gear that people use for rock climbing. And of course, we have this lady who's sleeping on the edge of this rock face, which terrifies me, but they were very fascinated by that, looked at all the gear, right? And then you can see the harness and all the ropes and everything. And so they came up with ideas from the videos that we watched, and then they had their own ideas. And so then so they had this whole list, and I put this wasn't for everyone to do all at once because logistically that's a really hard thing to do. So I had it as a center within the classroom when they were engaged in free choice. And so I had this entire, was very fortunate and had a great shelf of prototyping materials. And so obviously you don't need all these things, but this is what we happen to put out. And so if they were interested, they could go over and prototype some of their ideas. So I happen to use the little plastic eggs that you get around Easter time. You could also do hard-boiled eggs, which is pretty, that'll be pretty dramatic when the prototype fails. But really anything round is fine. I think this is also, I created this to send home with families as well. So if families wanted to do this, which you can see like whatever you have at home. So this is them engaging at within the center of all the different ideas they came up with. And so they use these little cardboard blocks to drop off of, but also some of the kids would drop it off the table as well. So how big was the wall that Humpty climbed, right? And so some of them worked really well, and some of their prototypes, it wouldn't hold them on the wall and it would just roll straight off, and then their little egg would break open. So this picture here on the top left, she decided to just tape around the side where the egg opens, so that would keep them from cracking open. Egg containers, of course. I mean, I can imagine the amount of iteration that the people of egg cartons went through to create that, right? Like that's a good design. So they used it as a chair to hold them up on the wall, so it's a little safer up there. You can see some bubble wrap around there. Down at the bottom, we have a little ramp for him to fall on, so the fall is not quite so hard, and there's a big bubble wrap pool down there. So it was really fun. So basically, they just got to do it over and over until they felt that their egg was safe. So like I said, like I explained some of the reiteration stages of going through. And so they just got the opportunity to explore until Humpty was safe. And so um, for me, this was one of the first things that I did as I was learning about design thinking within early childhood. And engaging in children's literature felt like a really natural space for me to connect with how preschoolers can go through this process together. So another book that I like to use was with the gingerbread man. I would ask them to either come up with a way to either catch the gingerbread man or to help him escape. If you think this, I mean, that was really quite amazing as well. If I have Macy wrote a book before I got a chance. I had like all this wonderful ideas of you can connect it to all the different children's literature, the Three Little Pigs. So this one is one that I found really, really helpful. So that's a resource for you if you're thinking of like what are some really great, just concrete ways to start using it in your classroom, but do it in a way that feels manageable to you, right? So you'll see these ideas in here, but you know you can follow it in your own way. So like I said, like with the Humpty Dumpty poem, that was whole group. We were talking and we went through those other phases together as a group. But then when it was time to prototype and iterate, that was free choice, right? So that way you weren't trying to manage 16 different creative um, iterations at one time, right? So you had the ability to go and engage with everyone. And for some kids, they weren't interested, and that's okay. The empathy didn't connect for them. They didn't want to design it. So I like the freedom there. So I hope you find this idea helpful as well. So you have examples of kind of more like this metacognitive, how can it help you think through things, but then also a more concrete experience. All right, now we're going to jump into our last full cycle. Can you believe it? Cycle 3, scientific method. So we'll have this 2-week cycle and then we'll have our final closing week, much like our first intro week. So scientific method, amazing. Of course, I really appreciate this cycle. I think it really helps us engage in the scientific method. We all have, I think, from reading all of your discussions around scientific method, we have a very specific view on what scientific method looks like and how we've experienced it, right? And I think this might help hopefully expand your view on this framework. And so I'm excited to see your thoughts here. So for this week, we have first the required read and watch. There's a video here in this first one here. And then 2 required readings, How Science Works, and a reread of Teacher's Researcher. But then just choose one of these 2 to add to your resources. And then, as always, your post is due on Wednesday, and then reply to your peers on Friday. And then you'll have your hands-on experience due the following Monday, and then the documentation of the framework in your daily life on Wednesday, and then peers. So here's a quick little overview of all of that. As always, please reach out with any questions like you guys have been doing. We're always happy to engage with you, and I hope that you really enjoy it as much as we do. So have a great week.